I'm Brian Lilly. The false search for justice and the lack of peace in Ferguson, Missouri. That is the topic of tonight's byline. The looters aren't interested in justice. The rioters aren't interested in justice. And sadly, I don't think President Barack Obama is either, based on his comments. This incident overnight in Ferguson, Missouri is being used for politics, which is truly sad. Al Sharpton, the so-called civil rights leader turned race hustler and MSNBC host, came out to denounce the decision not to indict as an expected outcome, but, well, he also called it a blow. He was on the front lines right away, saying this was not justice. Well, never mind that a grand jury of 23 people that had deliberated for several days over the evidence they heard decided not to indict police officer Darren Wilson. This, Sharpton said, was injustice.
They are the only people who have heard and examined every witness and every piece of evidence. They discussed and debated the evidence among themselves before arriving at their collective decision. After their exhaustive review of the evidence, the grand jury deliberated over 2 days, making their final decision. They determined that no probable cause exists to file any charge against Officer Wilson and returned a no true bill on each of the 5 indictments. The physical and scientific evidence examined by the grand jury, combined with the witness statements supported and substantiated by that physical evidence, tells the accurate and tragic story of what happened.
Now, as prosecutor Robert McCullough said there, the grand jury, 23 individuals, weighed all the evidence, the physical evidence, the scientific evidence. They heard testimony, and it all pointed in one direction: don't prosecute Officer Wilson. So they didn't. And then the rioting began, the looting, the burning of buildings, the random shots in the air. Well, protests spread across America as people interested not in the truth, but in perpetuating the friction between police and African Americans decided to use this decision to push their agenda. Listening to President Obama's late night address, that's what I heard. Sure, he came and he spoke against violence and in favor of the rule of law. He even said the grand jury's decision was to be accepted. But then he said this.
Finally, we need to recognize that the situation in Ferguson speaks to broader challenges that we still face as a nation. The fact is, in too many parts of this country, a deep distrust exists between law enforcement and communities of color. But what is also true is that there are still problems, and communities of color aren't just making these problems up. Separating that from this particular decision, there are issues in which the law too often feels as if it is being applied in a discriminatory fashion.
President Obama is using this incident to say police are racist, and by extension, he's insinuating that race is at the core of why Officer Wilson shot Michael Brown, rather than Brown's violence against Officer Wilson. Officer Wilson had stopped Brown on suspicion of taking part in a robbery nearby. Brown was suspected of stealing cigars, a type often used to smoke pot with, and of attacking a store clerk. It is an incident all caught on video camera. Now, as Wilson pulled up his car near Brown last August, he tried to get out of his car to talk to Brown. Brown shoved the car door closed, not once, but twice. Then Brown reached through the police car window and began attacking Officer Wilson. From Wilson's testimony, as he describes Brown hitting him, I tried to hold his right arm and to use my left hand to get out and have some type of control and not be trapped in my car anymore. And when I grabbed him, the only way I can describe it is I felt like a 5-year-old holding on to Hulk Hogan. Eventually, Wilson pulled his gun. He didn't have a taser. He couldn't get to his baton or either other items to beat back Brown, and he told the grand jury this. Now, after Wilson did get out of the car, the allegation against him was that he shot a fleeing Michael Brown, or that he shot a young man with his arms up in a position of surrender. Well, Wilson always maintained that he shot Brown as he ran at him in an aggressive mode, like he was going to be attacking him again. And that's something the grand jury believed because it was substantiated by several witnesses, including African American witnesses.
Were any African American witnesses who testified that Michael Brown was coming towards the officer when Brown was shot?
Yes. All the ones that I mentioned specifically were all African Americans. That the one who indicated that he came at him in a full charge, and that as Officer Wilson fired shots at him. Mr. Brown stopped, and Officer Wilson stopped shooting. And as Mr. Brown started charging at him again, those are his words, his testimony, Mr. Wilson started shooting again. And so the others who had very consistent stories, not just with each other, or not just their stories or their testimony throughout, but they were consistent with the others, several others, they're all African American.
Now, I don't pretend to understand all the intricacies of race and race politics in America, but I do know when issues are being pushed on political points rather than on substantive facts. The reason the grand jury did not indict Officer Wilson is because Michael Brown was attacking him. Wilson acted in self-defense. Brown is not the young, gentle giant portrayed in so many media reports. He was not shot for walking while black, as President Obama has hinted at. No, he was shot for repeatedly attacking a police officer who would stop Brown to ask questions about a robbery. Here's my final point. This murder, like Trayvon Martin before, is being played up into a national story, an international story. Why? Simply put, because it's a white man that shot a black man. But every day in America, black men are shot and killed, and those murders go mostly uncommented on, beyond the local news. Where is the outrage over the shooting of Rolex Dior Johnson, shot and killed in Dearborn, Michigan recently? What about the 3 killed, the 5 wounded in shootings over the weekend in Chicago? Things are so bad in Chicago, Barack Obama's hometown, that the Tribune, the local paper, has a whole section just on the murders. But there's no outrage. There's no demands for justice that see the national and international media descend on the city that, well, sees the president speak out. Why? Because as former New York Mayor Rudy Giuliani points out, the murderers in those cases are often black as well.
93% of blacks are shot by other blacks. They are killing each other. And the racial arsonists who enjoyed last night, this was their day of glory, the racial arsonists. They don't talk about that. When do you hear them talk about how do we really reduce crime? What are the causes?
That Michael Brown died last August is tragic. I can guarantee you his family mourns that. I can also guarantee you that Officer Wilson wishes it never happened. But I can't say the same for those using this for political gain. No, they seem to thrive on this sort of thing, on sowing divisions while calling for healing. Instead of giving them a soapbox, I say it's time to admit the truth, boldly state the facts, and call the charlatans out for what they really are. And that's the byline.